We're about to dive into one of history's most charged moments, a time when massive, ancient empires were starting to crack, when new countries were being forged in fire, and all of Europe was, well, basically sitting on a massive powder keg. The only question was, what was going to light the fuse? It's a question we've all probably wondered about at some point. I mean, how does one single event, one assassination, manage to pull the entire world into one of the most brutal wars in human history? The answer, as you can probably guess, is way more complicated than you'd think, and it started long before that day in 1914. So to really get what happened, we need to rewind. We have to understand what the world looked like before the explosion. Because the early 20th century, it wasn't a map of countries like we know today. Nope, it was a world of huge, sprawling empires. Think about it this way. On one hand, you've got these giant, multinational empires. They were just these massive patchworks of different peoples, different languages, different cultures, all ruled by one person, an emperor. The only thing they had in common was that they answered to him. But then, on the other hand, you have this new idea bubbling up, the nation-state, the idea that people who share a history and an identity should have their own country. Back then, that was a pretty revolutionary thought. And a perfect example of this old, creaking system was the Ottoman Empire. For hundreds of years, it controlled just immense territories, including a super volatile part of southeastern Europe. But by the time we get to the late 1800s, the empire was, well, it was falling apart. And as its grip got weaker, a really dangerous power vacuum started to open up. And that brings us right to the heart of it all, the Balkans. This place became so unstable, so packed with tension, that people literally started calling it the powder keg of Europe. Let's get into why. So first off, what even are the Balkans? Well, you're looking at one of the most diverse places on the entire planet, both geographically and ethnically. It's a total crossroads of cultures and religions, filled with people that the rest of the world just kind of lumps together and called the Slavs. I mean, just look at this. In this one little corner of Europe, you had the beginnings of modern Romania, Bulgaria, Albania, Greece, Macedonia, Croatia, Serbia, and that's not even all of them. All these different groups, all simmering under the fading control of the Ottoman Empire. You can just feel the tension building, right? And a powerful new idea was about to be thrown into the mix. The very first fuses of this powder keg, they were actually lit from the inside. As that old empire started to crumble, the people of the Balkans began to dream of having their own countries. But that dream, it was about to get real ugly real fast. The idea that spread like wildfire was something called romantic nationalism. It's a fancy term, but the idea is simple. If we share a language, a culture, a history, we deserve our own nation. And as the Ottoman Empire fell apart one after another, these groups grabbed onto that idea, broke away, and declared they were independent. But here's the tragic twist. The dream of freedom, it soured almost immediately. Instead of all these new countries working together, they became fiercely competitive. Suddenly, it was all about who could grab the most land. The fight for freedom turned into a free-for-all, with everyone trying to dominate everyone else. And just when you thought it couldn't get any more complicated, the great powers of Europe looked at this mess and didn't see a tragedy. They saw an opportunity. The Balkans were about to become a chessboard for some very big, very powerful players. Yeah, this little regional squabble suddenly went global. All the major European empires started paying very close attention because they all had their own ambitions. And so they started meddling, making secret deals, and basically pouring gasoline on a fire that was already burning out of control. And this shows you exactly what was going on. You had Russia, who saw itself as the big brother to the Slavic peoples. You had Austria-Hungary, terrified that this new nationalism would infect its own empire. Then there was Germany, wanting to expand its power, and Britain just trying to protect its trade routes. Each one was playing a game against the others, and they were using these small new Balkan countries as their pawns. So let's recap. We've got the powder keg, a whole region filled with internal fighting, and now being manipulated by external powers. It was primed to blow. All it needed was one single spark. And that spark came on a summer day in a city called Sarajevo. The heir to the Austro-Hungarian throne, Archduke Franz Ferdinand, decided to pay a visit to Sarajevo. Now, this was an incredibly bad idea. Sarajevo was full of Serbian nationalists who hated being under Austro-Hungarian rule and dreamed of joining the new nation of Serbia. So for the Archduke to show up, it was like he was deliberately poking the hornet's nest. And on June 28, 1914, a 19-year-old kid named Gavrilo Princip stepped out of the crowd, raised a pistol, and fired.
He killed both the Archduke and his wife. The spark had just hit the powder.
What happened next was like watching dominoes fall in terrifyingly quick succession. First, Austria-Hungary blames Serbia and attacks. Then, Russia, Serbia's protector, starts mobilizing its huge army. That brings in Germany, Austria-Hungary's ally. And once Germany is in, Russia's allies, France and Britain, have to jump in too. That whole complicated system of alliances, which was supposed to keep everybody safe, actually guaranteed that the whole continent would be dragged into war. So really, when you boil it all down, here's what happened. You took this powerful, beautiful idea, nationalism, the dream of a homeland, and you mixed it with the ugly, greedy ambition of imperialism, the desire to control other people. It was an absolutely toxic combination, and it led Europe straight into a catastrophe.
The war that followed was unlike anything anyone had ever seen. The explosion didn't just kill millions of people, it shattered the old world order and completely redrew the map of Europe.
By the time the war finally ended in 1918, 4 of those great ancient empires were just gone. The Ottoman, the Austro-Hungarian, the German, and the Russian empires. They were all wiped off the map, destroyed by the very nationalism they had tried so hard to crush. So what rose up from all that rubble? Well, it was the very idea that started the whole fire. The concept of the nation-state, the idea that every group of people should have its own country, was no longer some crazy dream. It became the new normal, the way the whole world was supposed to be organized. The war created the world of nation-states we live in today. But you have to ask yourself a pretty haunting question. The old empires might be gone, sure, but has that game, the game of big, powerful countries competing for influence, for resources, and for control over smaller nations, has that ever really gone away? Something to think about.